Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker today is Mr. Edward M. Yarbrough. As a young man, Ed quickly adopted and mastered the rappel and prusik methods that were developed by Bill Cuddington in the 1950s. Along the way, Ed discovered, descended, and explored many southeastern vertical caves, a number of which are now considered classics in the TAG region. On one memorable occasion, Ed purchased a very long piece of rope at Carter's hardware store in Nashville, placed it on a seat beside him, and rode a Continental Trailways bus to northern Alabama. Before the adventure was over, Ed did what amounted to essentially a solo descent of Surprise Pit in Fern Cave. Ed did on that trip what was the deepest known freefall in America. Ed did on that trip what amounted to only the sixth descent of that intimidating giant. And Ed did that as a man of 19 years of age. Ed Yarbrough is one of my heroes in caving, and he provides a shining example that a man can do world-class caving and in addition lead a productive, a joyful, and a virtuous life. For his day job, Ed is a practicing attorney in Nashville, and he is numbered amongst his clients some world-class, super famous, big-time country music stars. He has applied his skill set to various boards, museums, and universities. He has served God through his church as an elder, as a deacon, and as a Sunday school teacher. Ed fought with our American forces in Vietnam. He received the Combat Infantry Badge, and he was awarded a Bronze Star. Please join me in welcoming a pioneering vertical caver, a terrific friend, a good guy, a great American, and your 2019 NSS Luminary Ed Yarbrough.
Well, good afternoon. After that introduction, there's no way in the world I can live up to what has been said about me. I appreciate Dave's very generous remarks. Unlike Dr. Finch, I wanted to hear what he was going to say because it'll probably be the last time anything that nice will be said about me in public. But I really identified with Don's speech yesterday when he described himself as a juvenile delinquent who became a caver. I'm certain that all of us have our individual stories to tell about how we started, but I think caving actually saved me from a lot of things that were going on in the early 60s, and I expect there's some folks in here, some of whom I know personally, that would have a similar story. I'm going to have to go pretty fast because I'm afraid I've been guilty of putting in too many pictures, but I know you wanted to see my picture from the high school yearbook and talk about the early years. Everybody has that first cave, right? And in the summer of when I was 12 years old, my mother took my sister and me to Tuckaleechee Caverns over in the Smoky Mountains, and I thought that was really one of the coolest things I had ever seen. The next year, at age 13, I got a paper route, and after a few months of delivering papers on a bicycle, I discovered it was a lot easier to do it on a motor scooter, and I had a Cushman Road King, which came in handy later on when I had my first real caving experience. Like many of you, perhaps, I was a big fan of the Hardy Boys, and I was one of these people that after reading some of those books, I began to realize that a lot of those books had tunnels and caves and things like that were fascinating. I had also seen the 1933 movie King Kong, and I was really enthralled by some of the artwork in that book, that movie, especially the cave at the top of the mountain on the island where they discovered King Kong. So, in a little bit after the motor scooter purchase, I had a buddy that lived in the neighborhood who invited me to go to a cave that he knew about, but he said he would take me only on the condition that I gave him a ride on the back of the scooter. So I put him on the back and took him out Highway 100 in Nashville to Vaughn's Gap Cave. It was a very small cave, but to me it was the most thrilling thing I had ever seen. And what happened after that was kind of interesting, not only to me, but to my family. My mother and sister and I lived in a 2-room apartment above my grandparents' house. And after the trip to Vaughn's Gap, I had collected several bats from the ceiling of the cave, put them in a paper sack, and took them home because I thought they were just really cool. When I got them home and let them out in the apartment, they flew around for a few minutes and then started to hang on the inside of the drapery, so I thought it was okay. But later, my mother and my sister came home. It got dark, and the bats started looking for the entrance. My mother was one of these people that, had been raised on a farm, so she was not too upset. But my sister was screaming repeatedly, "Get them out, get them out!" So I had to do something. I collected them again and let them out into the night air, and realized, of course, many years later, what I did was probably extremely wrong from a conservation standpoint. But you've got to remember this was 1958 or something like that. The other thing that happened, because of my paper route, I was privileged to see the front page of the morning and afternoon paper in Nashville for 3 years, with 7 days a week. In the afternoon edition of the Banner in 1959, I saw an article about a young man named Jimmy Shadden who had fallen in a pit near Chattanooga called Mystery Hole. And there was a picture of him in that newspaper being hauled out of the pit with a broken neck. I made a mental note that I would never do anything like that. And by that I mean go in a hole like that. Careful what you promise yourself. When I thought about putting in a section on caving buddies, I realized that this was going to be impossible. I started making a list, and as the list got closer and closer to 100, I realized not only was I not going to be able to have time to do that, but I was going to have a lot of friends in the audience who were going to be left out. And so what I did was I cherry-picked just a few people that I thought you might have heard of or seen before. There's Harry White, there's Buddy Lane, there's Kyle Eisenhart, Larry Matthews, Tank Gorin, Alan Link, E.T. Davis. Some of these guys I went caving with hundreds of times, and a couple of them I only went with a handful of times, but that's an example that I think we would all have of the caving buddies and the friendships that you form over the years. That's one of the great advantages of being an NSS member, because an NSS forms a perfect network for staying in touch with your friends. Probably my best and longest term caving buddy from a vertical standpoint was Harry White. Harry White had been in the Army before Vietnam. He had come back and started a career in the fire department in Nashville, and I met him just before leaving for the war myself, because I was drafted out of law school in 1968. But right at the end of that year, some cavers had discovered a new deepest pit in the United States, the great fantastic pit in Ellison's Cave. And so I managed to get on a trip with Harry and Ron Zavishlek in January of '69, right before I entered the Army. Prior to that, I had a buddy from high school days named Bob Laird, and he was the one that had gone into the library at Hillsborough High School and looked up caves and speleology and so on, and stumbled across the name of Tank Gorin, who was a local caver and who was a longtime member of the NSS. And once we found out that there was a real caver not too far away from us in Nashville, we hunted him down, so to speak, and went to his house and discovered that Tank was a very cordial, almost aristocratic fellow. He was originally from Louisville, Kentucky. And Tank took both of us to Cumberland Caverns, where we met Roy Davis, Barbara Munson, who was the secretary for the cave for many years, and also the publisher of the Speleo News, and then Louis Lehman there on the left, who had come to the cave from Indiana and stayed there for the rest of his life. And by the way, Louis is still in McMinnville. He's at a nursing home not too far out of town, and I'm sure if any of you wanted to go by and visit there, I'd give you that information. He'd probably get a big kick out of it. Roy Davis, of course, was the amazing one. He's the one that could type so fast that he won the Indiana State Typing Championship. He had befriended a teacher, a typing teacher of all things, who helped him get into David Lipscomb College, and that's how he came to Nashville. And I think on Monday, if some of you were here, you heard the story about how he ended up going to Higginbottom Cave. Roy Davis was very articulate. He was also a good editor. He created and edited the Speleo News for about 5 years. And then in 1957, he took over the NSS News for about 2.5 years. And he was one of the pioneers, I guess, of taking photographs in caves and publishing them in the news. Prior to that, there hadn't been a lot of photography done, but as you know, that kept going, and now we have world-class photography in our news. I noticed in those old Speleo News editions that there was a section called Vertical Views. This is a title that Roy had invented, but it always seemed to be associated with a guy named Bill Cuddington. So I wrote a letter to Bill Cuddington. I thought I had met him briefly at the NSS convention at Cumberland Caverns in '61, although he did not recall it. But lo and behold, I got a response in 1962 from Bill Cuddington in Roanoke, Virginia. And in the letter, among other things, he gives me permission to use the term vertical views in the future in the Speleo News. And by the way, he promised to write articles for the Speleo News, and I'm here to tell you, and I would tell you if he was in the room, Bill Cuddington never made a single contribution to the Speleo News while I was editor. But of course, Bill Cuddington is the man when it comes to vertical caving. He virtually invented it, and I knew that. And so very soon after emulating Roy Davis as much as I could, I wanted to be a copycat for Bill Cuddington. And I didn't have Bill handy. He was in Virginia, so I was trying to get Roy to help me make prusik knots and so on, but Roy wouldn't do it. So for a while there, I was just a regular old tour guide at Cumberland Caverns and what you might call a horizontal caver. Alan Link and I did a lot of cave hunting. We found quite a few, some in Tennessee, some in Alabama. Many of you remember Sarah Corey on the left there. She's getting ready to descend into Conley Hole in Tennessee. On the right, you'll see more pictures of that later. She's at the bottom of the Virginia Natural Bridge, near Roanoke. In 1972, made a trip to Mexico, went down what at that time was the deepest pit in the world, and somebody talked me into doing a newspaper article about it in the local paper, and a soldier up at Fort Campbell saw that article and came to one of our grotto meetings. His name was Nick Nichols. And Nick was a very enthusiastic young soldier who already had a Konica camera and was very interested in learning cave photography. So we did a lot of palling around together and also did a lot of photography together. You'll see him in a number of these pictures that are coming up, particularly in Mexico. And many of you may know Nick or know of him. He's now an editor-at-large of the National Geographic Society and has published several books for them. Another really hardcore caver, and I think Marion Smith said the other day when we were talking at lunch that David Stidham was one of the real stout cavers, a word we used to use a lot. He was one of these people that just seemed to have unlimited energy and was a real hardcore sort of guy. He was up for anything anybody wanted to do, and I think he and Marion and Harry White and I were all competing a little bit to see who could go down the most pits. And of course, you know who won that contest. Marion ran off and left us like the roadrunner. In the summer of 1961, I was about to supposedly graduate from Hillsborough High School. And unbeknownst to my mother, and I'm not real proud of this, but a lot of you know this, and so there's no point in hiding it. I was doing so much caving that I failed to finish high school. It was a little awkward because I'd been accepted at Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech to go to college, but I couldn't go because I didn't have a high school diploma. My mother figured out that I could go to summer school and just take English and go on to college, but I refused to do it because I wanted to go spend the summer at Cumberland Caverns as a tour guide. So you can really sympathize with my mother. She was a saint. I was not. But that's what happened. And that same summer, the book came out. And right before I left to go to Cumberland to be a guide, I went to the geology division, discovered that it had just arrived for public consumption. And they opened the box, and I got the first copy of Bulletin 64 from the geology division in the state of Tennessee. And of course, since then, everybody in the world has gotten one, and that's where all the caves were back in the 60s. I started editing the Speleo News, I guess, in early '63, and I did that cover. Let me go back a second. I actually copied that picture out of the Tennessean. We have been using the same bat picture on the cover of the Speleo News for about 2 years, and I was one of these people that was a real harsh critic of everybody but myself. And so I said, well, if I'm ever editor, I'm going to have a new picture every time. Well, again, you got to watch out for what you promise, right? So after that one, I had to do a lot of others, and many times they were plagiarized. They were either photographs or pictures that other people had done, but I sort of embellished a little bit or took them on as my own. But over a period of about 3 years there, I was fairly active as an editor, and even got a little bit better as an artist, although never as good as people like Preston McMichael in Houston, Texas, and some of the others that are drawing today. But I did this cover for Georgia Underground, which they never used, and I honestly can't remember if I ever sent it to them. So there might be a good reason why they didn't use it. But if anybody knows the editor of the Georgia Underground, if it still exists, I'm happy to let them use that anytime they want. Now, Dave, of course, already told you the story, and you may have read it in the NSS News about the surprise pit thing. I've got to be real honest with you on this. I think I heard some discussions at the NSS convention in '61 about this pit. At that time, Bill Road had just found it. No one had been down it. They were talking to Cuddington about, how do we get a rope big enough to do this? And they didn't know how deep it was. They thought it was going to be deeper than Mystery Hole. So when I heard about that, that was just a thrilling thing to me, and I felt like I needed to somehow, get into that game. Well, you already know I sent a letter to Cuddington. Cuddington at that time was using a thing called a rappel spool. I have a rather crude one over here. Some of you may have seen it out in the hall. And so I wrote him again and asked him if I could borrow it. And it just so happened that we were going to be going to the convention that year in Mountain Lake, Virginia, 1963. Bill was going to be there, so he brought his rappel spool and allowed me to borrow it. Now, I didn't intend for this to be solo or semi-solo or whatever. I wanted people to go with me. And the main guy I wanted to go with me was Roy Davis. I figured he's a pit man. He's been down the Goof. He ought to go to the Fern Cave and do the deepest rock. Well, he wrote letters too. And by the way, you notice the postage on this? 4 cents. A first-class letter in 1962, I think it is, cost 4 cents. But anyway, he wrote me a letter and pointed out that as the Fern Cave trip, don't call me, I'll call you. In other words, ain't no way that Roy Davis is going down no stinking surprise pit. So that's what I was up against. But I kept at it. I managed to get a hold of that spool, and then I had a machine shop in McMinnville copy it, and to my surprise, when I got it back, it had been chrome plated. I think this guy was actually a bumper repairman or something, but anyway, that's Kirk Holland going into Young's Pit on Short Mountain with the same rappel spool that I used at Fern Cave. Now, again, I didn't think about solo. That wasn't the point. I just had this, unbelievable urge to go down this pit, and I wasn't going to let anybody tell me I couldn't. So I did go to the hardware store. I bought the rope. It was kind of funny walking from the hardware store back to the apartment where we lived at that time. This, 460 feet of 5/8 manila is a lot of stuff. And you could barely see my head. It was a big pile. And some wise guy at a bus stop asked me if I had a light. But that was the first part of it. Then I got on the bus. Then this guy right here, Harris Thaxton, was a local guide. He lived in McMinnville and had worked at Cumberland Caverns, and I knew that he lived somewhere in Huntsville. So when I got there, I was able to find out where he was and hitchhike to his house and put all my stuff in his car. He drove me out from that mountain and proceeded to do the pit. Now, this is a photograph, probably one of the early selfies. This was taken with the same equipment that's right over there. It's a Leica 3F on a tripod with a little Honeywell flash attachment and a self-timer. So I was able to set all that up and then go get in the picture and take a picture of myself at the bottom of Fern Cave. One of the things that I didn't realize at the time, and certainly realized much later, was that the people in Huntsville were not real thrilled with me coming down and doing their pit without previous contact. And so I got a little static from them about that. We'll say more about that later, perhaps. I always thought it was really cool that Nashville only had one skyscraper and that the drop in Fern Cave, which at that time we thought was 426 feet, was longer than the drop off of LNC Tower. So in the Speleo News article that I wrote, I put the tower next to the pit. Later on, of course, I went back many times. The left picture is the 404 drop with Neil Arnwine coming down, and on the right in my old International Harvester truck, that's Nick Nichols, in a trip that we made to New Fern. Now I'm going to go as quickly as possible through some of these because I know time's going to be an issue, but back in those days, we were working on the equipment, and at the same time we were finding stuff. And Bill has always said that it's amazing to him how the equipment developed right along with the depth of the drops. If they had found gold and Renus in the 50s, they'd have tried to do it with cable ladders, and that would have been a real mess. But of course we didn't. So the next big thing was Whiteside Mountain in '65. Bill had located that and had been down it partially, but was not able to bottom it out. So we got together a big group of people, including Richard Schreiber, Kirk Holland, Barry Ferguson, Sarah Corey, me, and at least 5 or 6 others. Did I mention Schreiber? I think Schreiber provided the rope. And of course, Bill was going to go down first. Now look at what he's using. That's what you call a fireman's pompier hook or fireman's carabiner. It's a great big pear-shaped carabiner. And the advantage of it was that it could go over a knot. The knot would just flip right through it because it's such a big opening. The disadvantage, which we learned for sure on that trip, was that it put such a sideways spin into the rope that it created a huge knot at the bottom that actually climbed itself. And when Bill was around 200 feet from the bottom, he met a huge knot of rope and couldn't go another foot. So he had to flatten himself out against the granite wall of Whiteside while we retied the rope and put 200 additional feet down the drop with a big knot. And he was able to get down to the bottom of Whiteside for the first time. Of course, after that, many trips have been made. I'm sure many of you have done it. It's a fabulous place. And this is just a sort of a potpourri of pictures from various trips over the years. Most of the time, Harry White ends up in my photographs because he was the one that was with me most of the time. Now these are a little confusing. The one on the left is looking down from the rope, and the one on the right is looking up from the rope with a companion climber. If you don't know what you're looking at, that one can be a little perplexing. The next thing that Bill organized was the Table Rock Mountain expedition in 1972. I was back from the Army then and was trying to do every pit and cliff in the eastern United States. And so as soon as I found out he was going to be doing this, I was able to get on the trip. There was a young woman from Kentucky, I believe her name was Kat Hayden, and she was there. It was one of the first times, other than Sarah Corey, that I had seen a female on a rope. She was a very capable rope climber. And Marion was on this trip as well. I had pictures of Marion on the right, Bill Cuddington on the left. Here's Bill at the top. I don't know if this is open anymore. I know Bill had to get permission to do it, and the permission was always a problem because it's in a state park. Now, everybody knows that Bill's a health nut. I don't know what he was doing here, but apparently he thought it was important before he did the drop to put his feet over his head. And Dan Hale is standing there scratching his head, and Bill is saying something fairly rude to him, I think. This is a cartoon that I drew of Bill, put in the Speleo News to make him look a little more heroic than somebody lying on his back with his feet on his back. When Jody and I, by the way, Jody Bailey gets full credit for all the graphics on this deal. He's an amazing guy when it comes to the technology. When we were putting this PowerPoint together, I discovered this picture that I probably hadn't looked at in 40 years. And I think it's my favorite picture because I didn't realize until we were looking at it that it looked like the cloud was starting to come over the crest of the mountain right behind Bill. Next big thing that happened was the Run to the Mill discovery. Nick Crawford, who by the way is from Cookeville and went to school here and still lives around here somewhere, he did a lot of hydrology work in the Grassy Cove, head of Sequatchie area, and discovered an anomaly on the water that goes from Grassy Cove to the Devil's Step Hollow, and discovered that there was a second sinkhole or second swallow. As a result of that, cavers from Nashville worked on it, and then finally cavers from Chattanooga, led by Rick Bridges and Buddy Lane, discovered an opening and went into Run to the Mill. Some of you may have done that cave this week. It's definitely one of Tennessee's outstanding caves. One of the things that we used to do when there was a big discovery like that is try to have a big spread about it in the Speleo News. So this is the early '75 issue of the Speleo News, where Rick Bridges wrote a long article about the cave, and Nick Nichols and I went in and took black and white photographs of many of the key parts of the cave and put those in the Speleo News so that people could see what had been found. That's one of the great things about local newsletters and the NSS News, but the local newsletter kind of leads the way on these local discoveries. I mentioned Natural Bridge. Once again, Bill's leading the way. He got permission to do the bridge. He'd done it numerous times before. In fact, the first time I knew anything about somebody doing Virginia Natural Bridge, Cliff Foreman, one of Bill's old buddies, had come to the cave during the early '60s and told me, this is before I was doing any vertical work, he told me that he and Bill would get at the top of the bridge, tie the rope onto a tree, coil up the rope, about 50 feet of it between them and the tree, and then jump off backwards and just free fall until they got below the arch, and then the rope would, come into their rappel device, whatever it was, might have been a carabiner over the shoulder at that time. And he had me believing that for several years. Bill Cuddington did set the record straight. He said we never did that. There's Vertical Bill, and you can see on the left there the people sitting on the benches on the walkway at the bottom of the bridge. I think I've misspelled Kyle's name there. I looked at the slide later and realized it doesn't have the E there. There's Sarah again. These are pictures from the rope, looking straight up. And there's Shriver. He was on a lot of these trips as well. Now, I mentioned that we had this infatuation with LNC Tower. LNC Tower is 409 feet from the top of the air conditioner to the corner of 4th and Church. As a result of doing the drop in Fern Cave, we figured, hey, we could do the building. No big deal, right? but it was owned by an insurance company. That's a problem. If you want to climb on a building, don't pick someone that's owned by an insurance company. But in 1978, my buddy Harry, who at that time was captain of the high-rise rescue unit of the Engine 12 fire department there in Nashville, managed to convince the insurance company that they needed to pre-test the building for fire escape. Yeah. And without telling anybody, he kind of drafted me as fireman for a day. So on an early Sunday morning in November of '78, we started at the engine company. We got on the fire engine. We went downtown and rigged the building. It was quite a treat. And by the way, buildings are scarier than pits. Pits are friendly. Buildings are not. But we went up the elevator, tied the rope on the radio antenna on top of the air conditioner, and proceeded to rappel and prusik, or Jumar, I guess, the building several times. That's me and Bob Binkley there on the right. There's some of the other firemen. That's Harry, Bob Binkley, and my foot on the right. This is my favorite. This is looking down from the rigging point at 4th and Church.
What do the letters L and C stand for?
I didn't. Fortunately, my ears are bad, so I didn't hear that. Afterward, I'll try to handle that. This is balcony sink. Now, this kind of takes us back a little bit. I mentioned that when I did the Fern Cave thing, that I sensed that some of the folks down there were not real happy with me. Although one of my best friends became John Beach, who was editor of their Grotto News, and then John Cole became a friend, built a road eventually, and so on and so forth. But Alan and I had a bad habit of going down to Alabama and finding stuff. And in June of '69, I was about to go to officer candidate school at Fort Benning, but I had a week off, and so we went down there and found several really nice pits, one of which was the one that we called balcony sink. Well, we called it that because this is the day we found it. The first time we did it, we didn't have enough rope. We had 120 feet of rope, and with a little bit of rigging, couldn't reach the bottom. So we landed on this thing that we called the balcony. And that's Alan on the rope, and I'm on the balcony with the camera. And you can walk almost all the way around the pit on this thing, so that's why we use that name. But we noticed later, when it showed up in the Alabama Cave Survey, they had named it Falling Cave. And so this was another little hint that I was getting that maybe the Alabama people were not real happy with us. This is the drawing of it that we put in the Speleo News. That's the view from the short passage at the bottom, looking back at we finally re-rigged the rope on a lower tree and managed to reach the bottom. That's Alan in that short side passage. And this is Harry in a later trip when it turns to ice. So in 1970, again, on about a 1 or 2 week leave from the Army, getting ready to go to Washington to be in the old guard at Arlington Cemetery, I went down there with Alan again, and we found this pit that we named Russo Well, naming it for the landowner. Turned out that it was 2 drops, and Alan and I only made the first drop, so I went back with George Benedict. This is George Benedict, an old Nashville caver and a classmate of Larry Matthews, bottoming out Russo Well in 1970. Now, whereas I claimed full innocence on my first 2 insults to the Huntsville group, this was deliberate. I said, okay, they changed my name. They changed the name to Falling Cave. So what we'll do is we'll draw a picture that's supposed to be somebody climbing out of Russo Well in Alabama, a recently discovered pit, and we'll put it on the cover of the NSS News, and then we'll go into the Army and go to Vietnam. Maybe not even survive all that, and nobody will ever know where it is. I didn't get too bad a reaction from that, but that was kind of petty. I've repented of that. All right, here we go. The first thing about Mexico is it was a whole lot easier back then than it is now. Again, we probably have to go fast. How are we doing on time, folks? Okay. Mexico, as you know, is a wonderful frontier for cavers. This is a picture of Cueva de la Salitla, I believe, in the outskirts of Gilitla, a little town off the Inter-American Highway. And I went to Mexico first time with Rick Finch in this vehicle, my TR3. We went to Copper Canyon over in Chihuahua. Didn't do any vertical caves, although we did go to the Bustamante Cavern. But then later on, I went back several times with other people and did most of what were considered the classics at that time. And there's Harry on the back of a truck was driven by one of his fellow firefighters. So in 1972, in March of that year, barely a month or so after the discovery and exploration of El Sótano, that's what we called it. I think it's El Barro now. At that time, the deepest pit in the world. We decided that we needed to be the third group to go to it, so we rushed down there and had an interesting time. One of the things we discovered when we got to the border was that one of our companions, Buddy Lane, was only 17 years old and couldn't cross the border without a note from his mother. Well, we didn't have a note, but we were going to El Sótano. So we went back into Laredo and found a notary who was willing to phony up a letter from his mother, which we took back to the border and went on into the country. I did a lot of crazy things back then. I think the only reason that I was able to clear the security check later on for being U.S. attorney was because either all the witnesses had died or there was just such poor record keeping at the border, they didn't know who had been across. So this is it. Now, there you go. Now that's Jody there. I couldn't do that in 100 years. But I'm on the wall there on the left. Alan Link took this picture. And then over on the right, you see a slight enlargement of that. I'm down about 150 feet. That sucker was 1,275 feet from that rigging point. And they claimed the depth overall of 1349, I think. This is Harry at the top. He doesn't look too thrilled about going down that thing. He was first. But that picture ended up in one of Bill Halliday's books. And there he is on the bottom. And the climb out of this thing was fabulous. We came out at night, and we just, lucky, dumb luck, but full moon. We got up about 600 feet, turned off our lights because we had a full moon for the last, 650, whatever it was. Of course, the locals at that time were just astounded that Americans were coming down there and going to the bottom of that thing. Again, if you look on the left, you can't hardly see him, but look at the little circle. That's Alan standing at the top of the outcropping, just not too far from the rigging point. Then in 1973, we went back to do Golondrinas. This was obviously much later after the discovery and exploration in '67. This time Buddy was 18, didn't have to get any notes. There's the path. That's a picture that Harry took of me starting down the 1,094-foot free fall into Golondrinas. The entrance on the left, looking up shot on the right. Now, notice the transformation of Buddy Lane. He goes from being a 17-year-old who has to be sneaked across the border, and the next year he's wearing sunglasses at the bottom of Golondrinas. In other words, he's become cool. And by the way, the other guy there next to Harry is Joe Webster. Here we are at the bottom. Kind of hard to see the people here too, but the circles help. That's Buddy on the left at the landing point, and Harry in the yellow shirt on the right. Another picture from the bottom, and then a picture of Harry coming over the lip after we made the tandem climb from the bottom. Then in 1974, made another trip. This time it was just me and Nick Nichols in his yellow Volkswagen Thing. I figured if I'd been to Mexico in a TR3, I could go in a Thing. You remember the Thing? It was a Volkswagen copy of a Jeep, and not much of an automobile, folks. But we made it, and after spending some time on the El Yarbrough Plateau with Steve Hudson and Marion Smith and Bill Steele, and a bunch of other luminaries, we branched off, and just the two of us went over to Hoya de Wallace. We didn't have enough rope to do the high side, so we did the low side. The next year, when we went back with Harry, we had enough rope, and several of us did the high side. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. This is on the left. That's the picture taken by Nick. And those two fellows helped us carry the rope and helped us around the pit. And when we were going down the drop, they got so excited, they started yelling, we got excited, excuse me, and started yelling, "Viva la Mexico!" Because we just thought this was the finest thing we'd ever seen. And these two young men, I think Bernarbe was one of them, and he started yelling, "Viva Nixon!" I mean, they knew who the president was. And he was almost getting ready to quit at that point. He hadn't been president long after that. There's a picture of some people on the left doing the high side. I'll have to go to the pointer now if I don't mess this up. There it is. There's a couple of people on the rope. And there's a couple of people here, but they're mixed in with the parrots. There's another drop at the bottom, but it's full of bird guano, so we didn't do it. You can tell I was never really very hardcore. I was a tourist most of the time. There's a picture on the right from the rope with Harry about 10 feet below me. And then back to 74, this is Nick climbing up the short side, which is about 400 feet, so it's a respectable drop. We also did Soto de la Estrella, the pit of the star, one of the El Abra pits. And this is the El Abra cave, right inside the highway. This is the Pozo de Gavilan, which is in the desert near San Luis Potosí. And over on the right, if you look carefully, you can see the truck, and that's where we rigged. We had to rig on the axle. There are no trees. And then on the left, that's Harry coming out. Then Honduras. Fortunately, Dr. Finch on Tuesday gave you a rundown on Honduras, so I don't have to. This is the trip in '84 when the lesser of the two teams were there. We did, though, go into the Cueva de Guatemala, which is shown on the right. That's a picture from the bottom of the entrance drop, which was a pretty respectable drop too. What, 300 or 400 feet? Something like, not that much. He failed to mention that I short roped the second drop in this cave. Had to come back up and rig more rope, but that was a great trip. And amazingly, at one of the Maya sites, we found some sculptures that resembled the Nashville City Council. So Mexico was quite a treat. Excuse me. That picture on the left is me and Harry coming out of the Cuesta drop. It's about a 560 or so into a huge room. I don't think people are going to the El Abra Plateau like they used to. Somebody told me the other day they thought that there were no trails left, and you pretty much have to do dead reckoning to find any of those things. Of course, this is the Huasteca Canyon, one of the great sights to see in northern Monterey area. Okay, I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the side adventures that I had with Roy. Of course, Roy was a fabulous person. He was somebody that was always up for a good time and had a way of having friends and experiences that nobody else on earth could ever have. One of those was an invitation in the early 70s from Russ Gurney, who not only a former president of the NSS, but also a president at that time of the Explorers Club of New York. And the Explorers Club had an annual banquet at the Waldorf Astoria, which was really quite an affair. It was a black tie deal. And on this particular occasion, Russ had invited me and Roy to come up and do a demonstration during a movie that they were going to show of a shipwreck. The announcer on the stage was going to be Lowell Thomas, the voice of Movie Tone News during the 40s, the famous voice, that told us what was happening in World War II. So there's Roy in the radio room up above the back of the theater. And here he is on what we called a bosun's chair. It was really just a Swiss seat. And I'm lowering him from the projection booth to the stage where he is going to land right next to Lowell Thomas, who is narrating this movie about a shipwreck. Well, one of the things that had not been discussed until it was too late to discuss, and that was how fast was I supposed to let him go down to the stage? Because he was on a pulley, and if left to his own devices, he could be there in about 30, half a second. But he managed to make it, and I managed to let him down without too much of a hazard. And then he's the one that got the picture with Mr. Thomas, not me. So I was just a supporting cast at that time. But that was quite an experience for an old country boy. And then the other thing I did with Roy, again, as a college dropout, not a high school dropout, in the summer or spring, I should say, of '65, we went to Sweetwater, Tennessee, and did the lighting job for the Lost Sea. And then that summer, Roy was the manager of the Lost Sea, which meant that the Cumberland Caverns didn't have a manager. So I got to be manager for one summer. And then I went back to school and got serious. All right, this is what I'm going to call the lightning round, because I know there's not much time left. But I know that you came here, many of you, because you wanted to see some pit pictures. You've seen a few, but we're going to go kind of fast here and just identify. So there's some repeats because you go back and get different lighting conditions and so on and so forth. That picture to the right was taken in the early 70s in the South Pittsburgh pit, right about this time of year when the sun is vertical, or as close to vertical as it gets in this part of the world. And that's Ricky White, Roy's little brother, at the bottom. And I've always titled this picture, Ricky White Receiving the 11th Commandment. Ricky, by the way, became chief of the fire department in Nashville and only recently retired. Kegel. This is a pit that Nashville Grotto found in the 50s. They named it for a swimming pool. It's called Cascade Plunge. And Bill Dean and his group from Knoxville rediscovered it. And we went back to it and took pictures of it with Roger McMillan, who I think is here. Carter Pit, Dearbone, Kegel again, South Pittsburgh again, the drop at Lost Cove, Engle Double. Did Engle Double in '65 with Bill Tozier, and we were on goal line. And that's a 230-foot drop, so we were bouncing like rubber balls. That's the top of the cliff at, thank you, that's the top of the bluff over Lost Cove. Probably couldn't get anybody to identify this one. This is Sawmill Well. Sawmill Well is not talked about much, but that's a really nice pit down here at Mont Eagle. Booger Hole. Dearbone again, Rebel Cave, Terode Pit, really nice pit in Alabama. Named for somebody. Yeah. Hall Pit. Jim, is that pit named for you? Okay. Named for Jim Hall. Now, I always call this Never Hole, but everybody down here calls it, down there calls it Never Sink. Sinkhole. Harry White bought that. This is in the Never Sink, the day that Charlie Weeks fell. We're going to get to that in a minute. Yeah. Here's the day we discovered a bad place in the rope and cut a 300-foot rope and made two 150s out of it. That's Schoolhouse. The only reason I put this in, that's the only place I ever dropped my camera. That little Leica 3F camera over there. Very durable, very good camera, but you can't be dropping them. And the only time I ever dropped it was in Schoolhouse. Now this is the day that we all went to Trenton Well, a pit that had been discovered outside of Paint Rock, and Bill Terrode's over there doing some corrosion on a rock that looked like it needed to go at the top. In the meantime, nobody noticed that we rigged over a piece of flint and almost all died that day. That's the one that Harry took of me that we used in the news. That's the top of the B Cliff 200-foot drop. It's just a few miles from here. There's Roger McMillan at the top of Cascade Plunge. Jive Hole. Jive Hole was discovered up in England Cove, again just a few miles from where we are right now, up on the plateau. And Carl Niles, who I believe is present today, did a lot of the lighting work for us there. He's flashing the bulb there on the right. Natural well. Now, this is a picture of Never Sink. I'll use the proper name. That was taken the day that I went down it the first time in 1962. We're really not sure how many people had done it at that point. I know Don Black had. I know a couple of people from Tullahoma may have done it, but this pit was not being descended at the time I went, and like a lot of other things. And one of the things I discovered when I got to the bottom was that the bottom was covered with plant life of all kinds. And it was like the floor of the forest, you know, the virgin forest, where you sank about a foot into the stuff there. And of course, everybody knows it's been to Never Sink now that there's nothing but rock on the bottom. Oh, and notice the tree on the left, and the rigging tree for many years, both of which are now gone. Lover's Leap, Conley Hole, Jive Hole, Carl Niles again providing the light. Now here we are back at Never Sink. Look at the big tree on the left. It's almost all the way across. Eventually it, of course, fell in. This is Window Drop. This is right beside Interstate 40, just 10 miles toward Knoxville on the left before you get to Monterey. It's not a pit, it's a hole in the sandstone overhang. And it looks like a pit, but you look down, you see treetops. Balcony Sink or Falling Cave. Dive Hole. White Rabbit, the top, the 588-foot drop in Ellison. You can actually see Carl in that picture. That's Jive Hole again. Jive Hole. Now, I got his permission to use this. Everybody remember when Marion Smith had bright red hair? There he is. A long time ago. Conley Hole. Picture on the left was the first time I went to it with my buddy Bob Laird, and the picture on the right is a drawing that was done for the Studio News. Kegel again. Never Sink again. First time. There's Buddy at the top of the high drop, Ellison's. Booger Hole from the bottom. 404 drop at Fern. Now, when I got back from the Army, Harry was assigned to take me to every pit that had been found while I was in the Army, so that was a big job. So one of the first things we did, of course, was go to Stamps' pit up here on the plateau, just a few miles away. And Mr. Stamps was very friendly, and he told us about this drop over near Macedonia. And so we went over and did that. It was a nice, about 100-foot drop that we found just because Mr. Stamps knew about it. That's the second drop in Big Cedar Hole. Alan and I had found the entrance to this, but did not have rope to go down it. So Dave Stidham and I went back and did it, and finally got to the bottom. I think it was a total of almost 190 feet, two drops though, 120 and 70, something like that. All right, real quick, accidents and close calls. Had several. The scariest one really was the first one, 1962, right out here on Buck Mountain. Nick Crawford just let go of the rope for some reason and just fell 100 feet right in front of us. And the way he tells that story was that he and I were going to race down the pit. And that after he fell, I leaned over and said, "If you're going to jump, I'm not playing." That didn't happen. We were scared. We thought he was dead. But he hit a ledge and injured himself. We had to haul him out on a stretcher. Fortunately, the guys from the sheriff's department were pretty quick. This one, well, let me go back. This one was right before we made the trip to El Sotno, and Charlie Weeks did almost the same thing. Fell over backwards, his Jumar came off, and he fell over backwards down the 100-foot mountain pit. And before he hit the bottom, his rappel rack, which was still on his Swiss seat, got tangled in the main line, and the main line stopped him 3 feet off the floor. And that's the way the rappel rack looked when it came out. Not his day to go. I've mentioned Dave Stidham was a tough guy. He broke his leg in 2 places on the second drop in a Streak of Sunlight cave, and climbed out under his own power, and with my help, of course. And then we got to the entrance, and I went and got Roy, and I think Ron Zavishlak might have been on that one too. And then who else? One of Don Black's sons, I think, was at the cave. And okay. We're actually we're gonna make it. This is amazing. I thought I was gonna have to speed even worse than I have. Now, I'm not sure that this was supposed to be in this thing, but several people told me they thought I ought to do it, particularly since David put so much in the article about my other endeavors. So real quickly, I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about this. Somehow or another, I figured out along the line, but my real calling in life was to be a lawyer. Even though I was drafted out of school in '68, I went back and finished at Vanderbilt and got a job as a young prosecutor in Nashville, and am still working full time. But back in the war years, my first real assignment after OCS was the Old Guard. The Old Guard is the unit, the 3rd Infantry Battalion at Arlington Cemetery, that does the ceremonies at the cemetery and at the White House. And then a special unit called the Honor Guard, or Echo Company, guards the Tomb of the Unknowns. The only time I dealt with them was at night, when I would go over there and inspect the guard. It was pretty cool to have a key to Arlington Cemetery and go in and talk to the guards. And they would challenge me. If I didn't know the password for the night, I wasn't going to come in. So it was serious business. But we also did these parades. That's me next to the guy with the flag. And then, yes, I did go to Vietnam. It was kind of ironic that we were there at Arlington burying all these people who died in Vietnam, and practically everybody in my company was awaiting orders to go right there. So that was a little scary, but you know, once you're a caver and you've been to some of these places that we've talked about here today, hey, what's a war, right? So that's me on the left with Sergeant Parker right after we've gotten back to our little hooch from being on air mobile operation. We did air mobile operations, sampan operations, river, a little bit of river work, and some ambush stuff, but it was so wet where we were in the Mekong Delta, we didn't do much on foot. And then after law school, we'll go real quick. I did have an interesting side trip as a lawyer. I got a call one day from somebody in Senator Alexander's office wanting to know if I would be U.S. Attorney. I was 63 at the time, and I hadn't really thought about doing that, but it turned out to be a real treat. And I got to meet the governor on the left, and there's old Eric Holder and Rod Rosenstein on the right, and me down on the front row. And there on the left, I'm filing suit against Tammy Wynette's doctor for her wrongful death. Here I am colluding with Eric Holder and Bob Mueller. You're not cool if you haven't colluded now. Don't knock it if you ain't tried it. And worse yet, my wife colluded with it. And of course, you got to do a lot of press conferences. People were asking me why I wasn't more nervous up here. Jody calls me Mr. Microphone, so you know that's just one of those things you get used to, I guess. Now, real quick, everybody thinks lawyers make a lot of money, and we do. But the biggest cases I've had, quite frankly, were pro bono. One was a young man charged with the wrongfully charged, falsely accused of a murder, probably Nashville's most heinous crime, killing of a Girl Scout. He lived under that cloud for 30 years and then eventually was exonerated when the real murderer was tried and convicted. And then recently, my partner Charles Bone and I had an opportunity to get clemency for Centoya Brown, who was nationally recognized as somebody that probably had been given too harsh a sentence. So her life sentence for first-degree murder was commuted to 15 years in second-degree murder. And in August, she'll leave prison after having earned a bachelor's degree and having a stellar record for the last 10 years in the women's prison. And then in order to back up Dave, claiming that I'm, the lawyer to the stars and all that, I did represent George Jones in his last DUI. I say that because he had about 5 of them. This is the only time I was ever allowed to plea bargain with a grand jury. The DA, Ron Davis, on the right there, allowed me to sit outside the grand jury room, and we submitted 2 different indictments, one for DUI, which would have required him to go to jail, and one for driving while impaired, which would not have, and they chose to indict on the lesser charge. So George is very happy here because he did not go to jail. And I think we're going to do the questions outside, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, I appreciate your kind attention, and just remember, the NSS is the network for all these great friends that we have, so give them the credit for that. And one other quick thing, the Cumberland Caverns Christmas party is coming back. The Cumberland Caverns Christmas party will be on December the 14th this year. I think they said it'll be $25. So mark your calendars and be there on December the 14th, Cumberland Caverns Christmas party. Thank you very much.